Hair and makeup?
Good.
How we doing? Good, good.
Nice mask.
Thank you. I know it's in the spirit of the spirit. So I'm going to take my mask off just to introduce myself real quick. First of all, we have a wonderful group of people gathered here, and we have a wonderful group of people gathered out in Zoom land. So welcome to those of you on Zoom. So before I introduce myself and our amazing guest, I just want to do a sound check for our Zoom folks. If you guys can hear us okay, if you can hear me okay, if you don't mind just writing it in the comments to let our amazing videographer Mike know. Oh, and he's giving me a big nod, so we're good, they can hear us. Also for you folks out in Zoom world, we want you to feel a part of this group. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and, well, virtually raise your hand and just chat in the box, and Mike in the back will be asking the questions to us. So anyway, so my name is Sona. I am the owner of Bernina World of Sewing. We have a wonderful shop right down there, and we also have a beautiful shop in Wilmington. So is this someone's first time at Bernina World of Sewing? No, so we all kind of know the drill. How about new in our studio here? I know. Tell me you love it. Isn't this amazing? I'm so excited. For those of you on Zoom, we are in this beautiful, we have a brand new classroom. It's big, it's spacious. We've got a lot of wiggle room, dance room. We can dance here, but here we're going to sew and have a great time. So welcome again. I am beyond excited to have Liz here. Liz is with Free Spirit. She is a big wig at Free Spirit. She is all that beautiful fabric you see in the store. She inspires me to purchase it, and I appreciate that. Liz is an amazing artist. She is so knowledgeable about fabrics and colors and how things go together, and she educates me. It's not just about the fabric that we look at, because I look at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fabrics every quarter, and the education that comes with it, and teaching me about the person, the art, the significance behind stuff. It's an education. So when I learned that Liz was not just a master of what she does at work, but in her private life, what she is a master of behind me, I was just floored, because every time she comes and visits me, she brings me these amazing quotes that she has made or that had inspired her. So when we asked her to come and speak here, I was like beyond excited to have her here. And then I was diligently sending out the link for our friends on Zoom, and I wasn't paying attention as to the quotes going up on the wall. And Mike in the back there, you know, he had his head down and he's trying to make sure everything is working okay. And he puts his head up, he goes, "Whoa!" He's like, "What in the world?" He goes, "This is gorgeous." And of course he gets up and starts taking pictures. And then I was focused. I'm like, I don't want to turn my head up. I want it to be a surprise too. And sure enough, when I lifted my head, I was just delighted, kind of like you were when you came in here, to see this beauty of color. And so you may not know, but I also knit. I'm an avid knitter. Well, I was an avid knitter. Both my sons played baseball, and one's still playing. So as you know, David, you know, baseball games are very long. So what I would do is I would sit and knit. I would knit. I would do things in the round so that I could watch a baseball game and not even look at my knitting. And then, you know, when it gets hot in the summer, you don't want to knit, you don't want to have wool. And I've always wanted to have hand work because I like to keep my hands busy. As you can tell, I'm a little bit jumpy, so it's always good for me to have something to calm me down. So I am excited to learn about this, because maybe this will be what I need to sit in the car and do a little handwork. So I love to hear the history about it. I'm excited you guys are here. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us. I truly appreciate it. People in Zoom, we have people from all over the country. Thank you. For some of them are getting up really early to be here. I appreciate that. And so welcome again. And I am going to let Liz take over. So it's your turn, and I'm going to mask up. And thank you for wearing your mask. We really appreciate it. You want a picture of me without it? You just taking a picture of me.
Got it.
All right, you guys. Well, welcome to Liz. Thank you so much. And I'm going to be over here if you have any questions. Again, Zoom folks, questions, just type them in. And okay, away we go. Thank you, Liz.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Dougherty, and I am with Three Spirit Fabrics. I do work with Sonia here and Sona here at Bernina World of Sewing in Raleigh, and also with Heather in Wilmington. And yes, when I visit, I bring quilts that not only have I made, but also our team of makers or even our designers have made. So I like to share our story in a complete fashion, from fabric to quilt. But today I'm talking to you about my own handwork journey for English paper piecing. So this is just me sharing with you why I'm passionate about English paper piecing. So first, I'd like to know how many of you have tried English paper piecing? Okay, so a few. Great. How many of you are knitters? Awesome. Okay. And the reason I asked that question, those two questions, is because English paper piecing, also known as EPP, is a slow maker craft. So if you are a knitter, you know what it takes to make a garment or even something as simple as a sweater or a cowl. It is slow. It is not zooming on your Bernina. It's a slow process. You, the needle, and the fabric, and the paper. So it's a slow process. If you've tried English paper piecing, thank you so much for trying it. How many of you completed a quilt? Excellent, even better. So I hope today I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about the history of English paper piecing and again, why I like it so much. I think English paper piecing right now in today's world is a wonderful, wonderful craft for yourself and for your maker friends, because it can build a community, whether through Zoom or in person. Because when you are sewing by hand, you're not behind a sewing machine, right? You're in a circle, you're sitting next to each other, you're doing FaceTime or you're on Zoom, and you can just prop that up and just be sewing, and you'd be surprised at how intimate that conversation can be. And also, as you can see here, these quilts are puzzles. And what has been so popular during the last 18 months but puzzle making? These quilts are puzzles, essentially puzzles. And these quilts are just based on planning, cutting, wrapping your fabric around paper, and stitching it together. So something you're already familiar with in your quilting life. In your EPP life, the stitching is handwork, and the combination of fabric, here's a diamond, and the paper is the difference, right? So all English paper piecing is cutting a piece of fabric in the shape, in this case, of my paper, and either glue basting it or hand basting it. So that's all English paper piecing is: paper and fabric cut to the shape with a 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch seam. Now, in the beginning, of course, there were no rotary cutters and fancy acrylics, etc. So people just used a very nice sharp pair of scissors and approximated their seam allowances. So don't worry too much about your seam allowance, trust me. So English paper piecing is simply a shape of fabric and a shape of paper. And of course, in today's world, we have these laser cut papers, which allow for even more precise piecing. In the past, people used newspaper, writing paper, anything they had around. In today's world, we're lucky to have these laser cut papers. And these can be reused. I reuse them maybe once or twice. You can also get these papers now in a paper that will dissolve after you wash your quilt. I've never used that. So I'm a traditionalist. I just use laser cut paper and fabric. So English paper piecing is simply a piece of fabric and a piece of paper that you wrap your fabric around, okay? And you make blocks like this, units. Here's the paper. This is glue based, and it's to the shape of the paper. The fabric is to the shape of the paper. So this is just a plain tumbling blocks. This is a hexie that's cut in a kaleidoscope fashion. So I fussy cut the fabric very precisely to create another design from the fabric. And this is hand based on squares. I did not cut the fabric to the shape of the hexie. I simply cut 2.5-inch squares and hand basted. Okay. So that's two ways of applying your fabric to the paper is glue based or hand basting like this. Some people do through the paper basting. I'm not going to get into that. There's a small group of Europeans that do that. That's what they learned. So there's actually 3 ways of doing it. I only myself do the glue based if I'm cutting it to shape. So I glue based if I'm cutting it to a shape, or if I'm doing a hexie, I cut 2.5-inch squares and I hand based. I don't usually glue base a 1-inch hexagon. And that brings me to, how do you know what size of paper to buy? Like when I talk about a 1-inch hexagon, that's this piece here. What we're talking about is the length of the side, okay? So all papers that are based on rectangles or squares, like a hexie, not a rounded like a clamshell, I'll get to that, but a diamond, a hexie, a honeycomb, a square, all of those are, you measure them along the one edge. That's the size of hexie or paper that you need. So when I talk about a 1-inch hexie, I'm speaking about this segment here, from here to here, the side, one side. If I were talking about the clamshell shape, anything based on a circle, you measure that from top to bottom. So pretend this is the clamshell. You measure it from here to here. That's how you know the size of a clamshell or a paper based on a circle. Okay, so when you figure out your pattern and you figure out what size hexie, I'm using the word hexie to mean all paper pieces. You'll find that is a traditional way of talking about English paper piecing. It's to just talk about the hexagon. So when you need to figure out what size paper you need to know your side. Okay, so when you go to order it with Sona or however you're going to cut your own papers, however you decide to go forward with paper, you need to know that length. So that's sort of a quick anatomy of a piece of paper. Anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down in the particulars because I will talk about those a little bit later. In your handout here, I gave you 3 things. I'm not really going to speak to the handouts. These are just for you to take home. This talks about the basics of English paper piecing, the process. This handout is about kaleidoscope effect. The Pasacaglia, which I will be talking about, is a kaleidoscope quilt. Okay, that's intense fussy cutting. And this is about how to go about doing that. Okay, and then this hexie pillow project I'm going to talk about at the end. Okay, so I'm not going to really talk about these pieces of paper, except to talk about the project at the end. But I did get permission to print these essays for you, so I'm not violating any copyright. Love Patchwork and Quilting gave me permission to print those out for you. So first, I want to speak a little bit about the history of English paper piecing, and my quilts here are going to show you kind of what's going on in the USA currently. Okay? So first, the earliest known English paper piece quilt that we still have is from 1718. There's a coverlet in the British Isles that they've dated to that time period. And we don't know who the maker is. We just know his or her initials were EH. That's all we know. English paper piecing rose amongst the more gentrified, educated group of, let's just assume, women at this point, because it was time consuming to make. So who had time? But you know, the gentry. And also the complex geometries, understand geometry. So it implies some sort of education or mathematics background, because there weren't any patterns yet. They were just shapes. And these designs tended to be like a medallion quilt. They tended to start in the center and radiate outwards. Okay, so in your mind, think of a medallion quilt. Let's see. Well, think of this in the center of a quilt and then radiating outwards. In 1790, the hexagon paper came to be. We don't really know why. It just suddenly showed up in a catalog that was available at the time. And that hexagon shape has led to even more complex designs. So in 1790, the first hexagon came on the scene. And then in the 19th century, as the Brits, of course, this originated in Britain and probably in the Netherlands. I'll get to that. So in the 19th century, when the Brits started traveling the world as they became empire builders, they carried this tradition out into the world, to the US, and in particular to Australia. Soldiers and sailors also started doing needlework of all sorts, and there is some evidence to suggest that they were also into English paper piecing. Why? Because it's portable, because it's small, because it helps while away the hours on board ship, right? So I'm going to skip way ahead, another century, to talk about this quilt here. This quilt is called Patchwork of the Crosses. It's by Lucy Boston. Lucy Boston, it was a novelist and master gardener in Britain. She lived from 1892 to 1990. We have a long life. She had a home called Hemsford Gray in Cambridgeshire, which you can visit. Yeah, the home was from the 1130. It's one of the most, it's one of the oldest homes in the UK that has had continuous occupation. And you can visit it. So late in life, in the 1950s, Lucy started doing English paper piecing. And in 1985, she had an exhibition of her work. And then in 2009, her, excuse me, I have that wrong. In 1976 was the exhibition. In 1985, the Patchworks of Lucy Boston was published. This was published by her daughter, Diana. And Diana still carries the historical torch for Lucy Boston and her quilts. You can go to, if you Google Lucy Boston, you will find the website that talks about Lucy Boston. And again, you can make arrangements to go visit the house and see the quilts in situ, in her home. And it's an interesting house because it's from 1130, and the quilts just beautifully fit that milieu. And in fact, today I was reading an article in the New York Times, and there was a picture about Laura Ashley and her fabric empire. And there was a picture of her home in Wales, in a very old home. And guess what was in the foreground? A beautiful English paper piece quilt. I mean, they're everywhere. If you look hard enough, you'll start picking them up in these historical homes in the UK. Anyway, in 1985, this book was published. And in 2009, in the US, this book came out. Lucy Boston, Patchwork of the Crosses by Linda Franz. Okay? And this book gives you the instructions to make this quilt on the back. I'll pass this around. Okay. It is based on this lozenge shape here. When you come up closer, you can see it. This quilt was made for one of the Free Spirit booths. We wanted to pay homage to Lucy Boston and the beginnings of the EPP movement here in the US. And so we used a Free Spirit designer, one for each block. So if you know Free Spirit well enough, you'll know automatically who all of these designers are. Like this is Anna Maria's block here. This is the Kate fabric here. This is Jane Sassaman, Tanya Whalen, and others, Denise Schmidt, Shannon Newland, etc. So we wanted to pay homage to Lucy Boston and her quilt and English paper piecing. However, our quilt, our lozenge, is about twice as big as what Lucy used.
Oh, wow.
So Lucy's blocks are much more refined and delicate. And what's fun about working this quilt is that each block is a story, right? When you're making this quilt, you're focusing on just making a story here. And that's pretty much true of most English paper piecing projects. You work in blocks, in little vignettes, and little portraits, and little pictures, and little stories. You're not so concerned about exactly where things are going to be placed, nor may you be concerned about how you're going to set the quilt. As you can see, we set this differently than she set hers. This is much more complicated. This is simpler. So that's, oh yes?
Yeah, Liz, can you describe the book, the name of it, and the author for the Zoom group?
It's the Lucy Boston Patchwork of the Crosses. So this quilt is called Patchwork of the Crosses, and this book is by Linda Franz, Franz. And Linda gives directions for doing it by hand, but also doing it on the sewing machine. Now, personally, I would never sew something so tiny on my sewing machine, but some people are not interested in handwork, and some people are. So I'm talking about handwork today, but Linda gives you directions for both. Okay. This is really, I mean, she gives you wonderful charts about each of the patterns and each of the type of blocks that you can do for this project. So this is the Lucy Boston. Right now what's going on is that Allowances, which is a fabric shop in Maine, they're an online only shop. Each week, they produce a small kit to make one block in the Patchwork of the Crosses quilt. So they show you, they give you a little package of fabric, and they show you 2 ways to make this crosses block. So if you want to try to make a quilt like this, have a look at what Alewives is doing. If you use Instagram, go to Alewives and scroll through their Instagram feed. I mean, they're super clever with the fabric. So they extensively fussy cut the fabric to create those secondary and tertiary designs. Okay? And it's a great training. Like you can get your packet of fabric and learn how fabric works just by following their visuals. And Alewives has been doing that for, I think they're on block number 279 or something. So every single week they produce this little kit that you can subscribe to or buy one-off. How do you spell that? A-L-E, and then wives, W-I-V-E-S. And then if you are on Instagram, I suggest you follow the hashtag EPP for English paper piecing, because again, you can find many, many ideas around English paper piecing just by following that hashtag. So, and you'll see here, if you come up close, you can see that we big stitched the quilting. If you go on Instagram and look at quilt projects, you'll see that some of them are extremely, they're beautifully quilted, lots of custom quilting. Doesn't have to be that hard. you can simply, as we did here, all we did was a square and then a diagonal. Because really the beauty of EPP is the handwork and the way the fabric plays off one another to create these little stories. Okay, so you know, this kind of quilt doesn't require that much quilting to make it effective. And of course, you can see our quilt is a lot smaller. Right? Yeah. No. Oh, good. It's gonna be a little closer. Okay. Cool. Okay. You don't see me. I don't see you. So I want to make sure I covered everything. Oh, so the thing about Lucy is that, of course, she didn't have acrylic templates or, you know, fancy papers necessarily. All she had was fabric and scissors. And her early EPP projects weren't just what we would call flat cotton, you know, quilting cottons. That's a lingo for today. But at the time, like just a plain flat cloth. She used other fabrics in her EPP's projects. So I suggest you have a look at the website and see what she's all about. And you can still get the book. The book is available out there. Again, the book is called The Patchworks of Lucy Boston. And it is done by her daughter-in-law, Diana Boston. Okay. So again, that was 2009. In 2011, Willeen Hammerstein came out with this book called Millie, Fiore, Quilts. She's a Dutch artist, and her passion continues to be these kaleidoscope quilts. And what do I mean by that? I mean intense fussy cutting and many, many, many pieces made into these rosettes that create a kaleidoscope. You know, think about that kaleidoscopic tube that we had as kids. You turn it, and the chips would fall at various designs. That's what's happening in her quilts. And the most popular quilt from this book is called La Pasacaglia. It took the quilting world, the handwork quilting world, by storm. It even inspired people who had never done English paper piecing to try La Pasacaglia. And I learned this morning that Sona is one of those people who tried to sew La Pasacaglia. Well, La Pasacaglia is one of the hardest EPP projects also in the world. I mean, her work is incredible, but it is difficult. You have to be a very, very patient and dedicated person to start this as your first project, because it assumes, in my opinion, a great deal of understanding of fabric and all the technique. You can't, in my opinion, you can't have a successful interaction with these quilts until you've done some preliminary trial and error, because this is truly your destination. Like these are heirloom quilts. So La Pasacaglia looks like this. And again, if you follow the La Pasacaglia Instagram hashtag, you can see this quilt done by people from all over the world in all kinds of fabrics and colors. I'll pass this around. So Willeen we're up to number 4. This is her 4th book. These books are published by a company called Quiltmania. They're a French company. So these books are in both French and English. And they're, you know, glossy, beautiful books just to own and read through, but also, you know, for patterns. So I'll pass these around so that you all can have a look. Millie Fiore, as you know, is a style of Italian glasswork. Those paperweights often have the Millie Fiore style, and Willeen Hammerstein is the author. Quiltmania is the publisher, and Sona has copies of this book for sale, and she can get you copies of this book. Okay. So these, again, kaleidoscope quilt, fussy cutting, smash hit. Oh, La Pasacaglia is based on the word is based on a 17th century Spanish musical form that is still used today, but it's a form that is mixed up. The refrain is mixed up and used in different ways with different instruments and in different keys. And I think that kind of fits the Millie Fiore kaleidoscope quilt project, because it's the same refrain, just mixed up in different ways. You know, the fabrics are mixed up, the rosettes, the shapes. La Pasacaglia doesn't have that many shapes to it. Not a lot, not like 25 shapes, EPP shapes. It's a very controlled number of shapes. What the variety comes from the fabric you choose and the way you put the shapes together in that puzzle. And this quilt, with like many EPP projects, grows organically, meaning you start your rosette maybe in the center or off center and you grow it from there. So it's not, you know, across the top or down the bottom or, you know, set on point or anything like this. It's a process that grows from the center, so it grows organically. In fact, when you start out, you may not even really know where your quilt is going to end up with the EPP. And I'll get to that again later. So you might have a color story that you're exploring with La Pasacaglia, or a type of fabric. It could be a reproduction fabric, it could be a cape fabric, a tula fabric, whatever. But one does not usually buy all the fabric you need for an EPP project, especially for La Pasacaglia, because you don't know how your fabric is going to work out, because you are going to be fussy cutting that fabric and creating kaleidoscopes, and you don't know how the color necessarily is going to play. So that as you grow your quilt, you will grow your, you'll look through your stash many, many times, and you're going to run out to your quilt shop many, many times. So this isn't a one and done kind of buying process. Like the quilting, accumulating the fabric is a process too. So next up, we have Katja Marek. She had a book come out in, let's see, 2014. She produced a book called The New Hexagon. And then in 2019, she had The New Hexagon 2. This, again, transformed English paper piecing, because she created these wonderful graphs here and gave us a sample on what it would look like. So each page was a separate block. So she gave us a dictionary, a treasury of quilt blocks that we hadn't had before. And they were simple. They weren't the Millie Fiore. They were block by block. So a sampler quilt, something we're familiar with. The Millie Fiore is a little bit out on the edge for us. This sampler approach, not so much. So she produced the New Hexagon 1 and now the New Hexagon 2. Katja is an interesting person. She's born in Germany. She moved to Canada with her family. Her mother was a tailor. She grew up crafting, so creating garments, creating quilts, making any kind of craft you can think of, she was accustomed to. So it wasn't that much of a leap for her to say, paper and fabric. I like that. I like how I can be precise without cutting and stitching on my sewing machine. In 1999, she opened a quilt shop in British Columbia, and you can still visit it. It's open. It's an ongoing thing. And what she did with the New Hexagon was she created one of our first quilt-alongs done in the virtual world. Okay, so, you know, we feel like, wow, we've had Instagram and quilt-alongs and Zoom for a long time, but really it's only been, 8 to 10 years, right? But again, it transformed our access to different crafts from around the world, including EPP. So Katja, she is a dynamo, like our friend Sona. She's really fun. If you ever have a chance to take a class with her or go to her shop, you won't be sorry. What's fun about the New Hexagon number 1 is that this quilt from Liza Lucy, who is Kate Facet's US studio manager and collaborator. She made this quilt. Each block here is from the new Hexagon Book #1. Okay. She, if you come up and look at some of these blocks, you can see how beautifully fussy cut they are, how she took Kate's fabric and created these little kaleidoscopes. So again, what's amazing about this book, this treasury, like many block treasuries, is that you move from page to page, making your little story. I mean, look here, this isn't even a story. This is just a single hexie, large hexie. Next to it is a more complicated hexie based on diamonds. Okay? And over, you can see that she's mixed and matched more complex hexies with a plain hexie, but because it's Kate's fabric, it looks intricate, right? So Liza saw this book, thought, wow, I wonder what it would be like in Kate's fabric. So she created this quilt based on all of the blocks in the new Hexagon #1. And also she showed us how we can finish our quilt in a different way, Liza did. Most of the time when you make one of these quilts, you're actually going to cut off all the half of your work on the edges. Liza didn't want to do that. She's like, oh no, I worked hard on these things. I'm not cutting them off. So she created this border. This is actually appliqué to the fabric, not machine stitched. And she created, of course, when she started putting up her little stories and created this quilt, she got a lot of requests to, wait a minute, I want to do this quilt. How can I do this quilt? So here she made a booklet called The Glorious Hexagon. And she gives you some tips and tricks on fussy cutting. And then right here, she gives you a graph as to exactly which block she used in each hexie, okay? So if you wanted to duplicate this, although I don't see why you would necessarily, because again, what's great about EPP is it doesn't have to be 100% planned out of the gate. I think that's the most wonderful part of EPP, is that you don't have to plan it. But if you want to, here's Liza's version. And then on the back, we have a version from a Australian maker and pattern designer, Kim McLean. Okay, so there's another version on the back. And you can see that Kim McLean cut her hexies in half on the edges, okay, and finished it out to the edge. So I'll pass this around, yeah?
So when you say that the quilt is appliqued onto the border?
Yep.
So the whole quilt was one piece and then
Yes.
they laid the border underneath.
Correct.
Okay, wow.
Yep.
What an undertaking. And it's so straight.
Well, Liza is a master quilter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I put these up, I'm like, wow, that is like perfection.
Yeah. That's
She's
amazing.
a master quilter.
Yeah, that border makes it. I mean, the
Yeah.
quilt is beautiful, but I think the border is the icing on the
I
cake.
agree.
Yeah.
I love having the border because it just sets this
Oh, yeah.
story in place.
It does.
You know, frames it. And the beautiful choice of border is because it has a lot of movement to it, but yet you're not just looking at the border. You know,
Yeah.
it complements rather than distracts.
That's
So,
gorgeous.
yeah, so this is what's happened with hexagons most recently. Katya partnered with a company called Paper Pieces. So Paper Pieces is a US company in Paducah, Kentucky, where they produce acrylics and papers. And Sona can buy from them anything that you need. This quilt and Katya's work really took Kate up to a next level of sales, honestly, because it was another way of using Kate's fabric that people hadn't thought of, including Kate himself. This is not his cup of tea, but it's a lot of people's cup of tea, myself included. So this increased paper pieces visibility, because paper pieces have been going around, let me see, I wrote this down, since the year 2000, but hardly anyone knew of them. Only a very small community of hand workers and paper piecers knew about paper pieces and that business. But in 2014, when Cogtew's book came out, and also when La Pasacaglia came out earlier, that rocketed paper pieces business. Paper pieces was really the only place you could buy stuff to do La Pasacaglia. It wasn't in shops. And that's another thing that Cogtew did, was bring EPP to us as quilters, just showing up in our shops. It suddenly was in the shop. It's a long build for this kind of technique to make it to the mainstream, you might say. So Cogtew was very important in transforming many businesses and in giving us a glimpse into something new that we could do with our interest in fabrics and quilting and knitting, you know, everything that we enjoy doing about craft. It's kind of all in one in English paper piecing. So that was this quilt. Now Paper Pieces is run by Jess Finn, who I believe is the granddaughter of the first owner, Joanne. Paper Pieces is a great spot because they also produce the acrylics in 1/4 inch seam allowances and 3/8 seam allowances. Now, how did that happen? Why do we have 2 seam allowances? Well, because in quilting, there's the 1/4 inch. But what's great about the 3/8 seam allowance, you know, cutting for a 3/8 seam allowances gives us a little more wiggle room when we're trying to center a design, right? So it gives us a little more space to make our paper and fabric look perfect. So in 2016, Kim McLean made this quilt for Kay Fassett's birthday. And it's showing us yet another thing that we can be doing. So over here, this, you know, you're looking at your pieces of fabric, you're looking through your stash, you're marrying up fabrics that you feel will look well together. You're looking at the repeat of the fabric. You're looking at all the elements of the fabric. And because the acrylic templates are often clear, you know, you can pretty much get an estimate as to how your fabric is going to look placed on the paper. And because we have that 3/8 inch seam, you're able to fussy place those fussy cut fabrics so it's perfect to make the kind of little story you want to tell. Well, Kim McLean gave us yet another way of doing EPP that was not as brain power intensive. This requires a lot of brain power and attention. If you don't care for that, yes?
Yeah, a question is, so each hexie is sewn onto a solid piece of fabric instead of the hexes sewn together, or is the border sewn onto the edge of the hexie's edge after all hexes are put together?
So the whole quilt is put together, and then you apply, then you lay your border fabric down, and then you pin it and piece it. So that the center of the quilt is done. And when you sew this together, like you have your, I don't know, 196 hexes done, and you have your layout as you like, you don't sew it from, you start here and start sewing and then down. Usually you don't do that. Usually you start somewhere in the middle and start sewing around like this. So you start in the middle and sew outwards. Because you can imagine if you want to have this on your couch or in your car, this sewing from across the top and down is onerous. Like it doesn't really, it's not that comfortable to sew that way. It's much better to start here and sew outwards from the middle, approximately, or over here, anywhere but the edges. And you keep your papers in until the very end. And you only, you can remove, you'll find that you'll need to remove papers as you're sewing because it gets too bulky. So you can remove the papers when all of the, see that one, yeah. So when the paper is completely surrounded by other hexes or shapes, you can remove the paper. You can just remove the paper like that. And then it's, flimsy. So you don't remove the paper here until you have, something here, either a diamond or whatever you're gonna put out here, till each of the sides are sewn, okay? And in fact, when I give my projects to the quilter, I will have pressed this very, crisply around the edges in particular before I remove the papers. That's the last thing I do before I send it out to the quilter, is remove the edge papers. Okay, so Kim gives us another way of doing EPP. So what we're doing is she has chosen Kate's large print fabrics and fussy cut, the flower or a portion of a fabric, but she's really paid attention to fussy cutting this large 8-inch circle. So she's cut 8-inch circles of several of Kate Fawcett's fabric. And then she has created a 12-piece hexie wreath and appliqued the wreath to the circle. Okay, so she has chosen, this fabric is called Guinea Flower. She's chosen it in one colorway. You get all these flowers. So you need a lot of fabric of 59 Guinea Flower in this colorway because she has cut 11 different, the same flower 11 times from the fabric. Okay. And she has used another fabric here. It's, I can't recall the name of it, unfortunately. But anyway, any circular fabric will do in this case. Yep.
Yeah, so another question from Mike. He says, my challenge is removing the acrylic centers and folding them so they can be sewn in the circle. So,
And this,
yeah, I believe
I'm
so.
not sure
Yeah.
what that means.
So he says the challenge is removing the acrylic centers and folding them so that they can be sewn in the circle. What's his
Acrylic centers.
comment?
I think she means paper centers. He means paper centers.
Okay.
Like a plastic template.
Oh, well, I mean, well, I guess it kind of depends on how you want to approach it. So, I have this pattern. Let's see what she advises. Sexy. I'll have to think about it.
Yeah, he
Can I come
says,
back to that?
yeah, he says he gets to the point that they do not fold well to sew with the centers.
Okay, so there should be no fabric behind the circle. It's just a fabric. There should be no template or plastic or anything behind this piece of fabric. I think, are you talking about having the papers here and finding it difficult to applicate it to the center? Is that what you mean?
I think he's talking about the papers in here. That they're more like an acrylic, maybe like one of those plasticky.
Oh, okay.
templates.
Yes.
That's.
There is a company that makes these as a very thin plastic. I haven't worked with those myself. My guess would be you want to starch and iron heavily and then take it out because those are reusable.
Yeah.
But won't they melt when you iron them?
No, it's,
They've got, go ahead.
if there's a company out of New Zealand,
That's right.
but there's some of their kits are sold in the US.
Mhm.
And what they do is they punch a paper hole in the
Yeah.
center so you can take that little purple tool that
That's
you have
right.
and just slip them
Pop it
out.
out.
That's right.
But they're designed to, you can iron on them and
That's right.
do whatever. They're really ingenious.
Yes. Well, that's the thing about EPP. And I'll show you my kit, but your kit could look vastly different. You could decide to use the washable papers the removable papers, if you will, these plastic pieces. But yeah, there's a lot of ironing involved when you're using a plastic reusable. But you might, I mean, that if you do a lot of it, it's a pretty good investment because, you know, essentially, say you're making the Tula Nova quilt, which I'll get to, you know, this is the bag of papers that you need, right? And you can save most of these for another project, but sometimes they get damaged because if it takes you 2 years to make it, you know, you'll be folding it and stuffing it in your bag and all this, and the papers get crinkly and not as pristine.
Yeah, and Mike goes on, he says, isn't the paper still on the outside edge?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. But I remove those, like, if I were making these right now, the papers would stay in here until I put in my diamond shapes, till they're surrounded. Then I would take these out as I was putting it together. So often I have a stack of plates or blocks that are all completely paper. I don't take them out as I go. With the plastic, you kind of have to take them out as you go because you're reusing them. And that means you need to be more careful about your projects as you store them for the time when you're going to actually sew together the whole project.
Yeah.
But it is a more, I mean,
Yeah. He
it
says,
is a style.
Could you ask that question one more time? The question he asked?
Okay, so the original question, hang on, was, my challenge is removing the acrylic centers and folding them so that they can be sewn in the circle. He says, you get to the point, they do not fold well to sew with the centers. And he goes on, isn't the paper still on the outside edge? And the Y seam is the problem.
Yeah, well, are you anchoring your Y seam? Like when you, if I give a class, when I give the class on sewing, this isn't a class on sewing, I talk about how to secure your corners, because you do have to take an extra stitch or two, kind of depending on the block that you're making and the stress that's going to be on that block. So I'm not really addressing that here today, but you have to take an extra stitch at your corners, at least one.
I guess he's saying that when you fold it to sew those two edge pieces
Yes.
together, that middle
Yeah.
part has to bend and it's not bending for the
That's right.
There's acrylic.
That's because he's maybe using the plastic. And I have not used that technique myself, so I can't really address the question from personal experience.
So he needs to take the center acrylic out before he sews those.
Probably, yeah. I mean, in his case, he needs to take out every piece. Anytime he surrounds a piece, he needs to take that piece out. He's not gonna be leaving them in, you know, like when I'm doing this, you know, I have a stack of these and the papers are all in there. I don't take anything out until I'm ready to assemble my clothes.
Yeah.
But
Mike says thank you.
yeah, I'm
that's
sorry I
helpful.
can't answer it.
No, he said that's helpful. So,
I'll have to think about that.
Yep.
Practicing that. Again, a feature fabric that's an 8-inch circle, and then you're making a wreath, and then you're using this diamond to tie it all together. And this is Kate's Aboriginal dot, which uses a solid. So it's not actually a solid fabric. And what's wonderful about using Kate Facet's fabric is that his fabric is what we call 68 squares. The fabric used here, this is Vinnie Schmidt, and this is Tula Pink, is what we call 60 squares. So Kate's fabric is finer, right? So doing handwork with capes is brilliant because it's not as hard. I'm not saying, I mean, it's perfectly fine to use the 60s, but when you start working in a finer fabric, like a Cape 68s, or if you use Liberty of London Tana lawn or any lawn, you'll find that sewing with that for handwork and EPP is just a dream. It's like sewing with butter. It just, your needle and your thread moves much more smoothly and quickly. I used to think that was a story. until I started doing handwork. I mean, I took in the information intellectually, I understood it, but until I started doing the handwork and using Caves fabrics and woven fabrics, other kinds of substrates, I didn't really appreciate how much Caves 68 squares makes a difference. And he is the only one in our Free Spirit family who asks us to use that 68 squares. So it's a finer fabric. It also makes the quilts much lighter too.
Could you explain again what that means? 68
Oh, yeah.
squares?
So you know how you have thread count for your sheets, etc.? The same applies to quilting fabric. So it's 60 threads per square inch, 68 threads per square inch.
So the higher you get, the easier it is to form.
Yes. So the higher the thread count, the finer the yarn, as they call it, thread. They call it yarns. The finer the yarns are to make the fabric. So Caves fabric is really nice to work with, as is a lawn, as is art gallery fabric, frankly, it's a little finer too. So this, Kim McLean made this for Caves' birthday. And I have to finally send it back. Kind of sad to see it go, because it's a really, you know, a showstopper quilt.
Oh my gosh, it's beautiful.
But, you know, it's time for Kate to have it. So, you know, if you know Kate's work, you can really see she's chosen some old fabrics and some newer fabrics. And you can see how amazing guinea flower is to use as a foil for these really big designs. So this is not hard, really, because it's big. Look how big the pieces are. Because I think I was speaking with Sonia here, and she likes little tiny pieces for quilting. If I had to use little tiny pieces, I would definitely be doing handwork. But if you just want to get started with something, you know, you don't have to make as many wreaths as Kim McLean here. You can make as many as you want and make it any size you want. Again, what's great about EPP is the sizing is very versatile and easy. You know, there's not a lot of calculation going on here in terms of just making the size you want. So, anyway. And you can see here, she cut off half. She made the whole piece and then cut it off.
Oh,
Usually you don't just make a half. You usually make the whole thing and then you quilt it and then you cut it off, which can be sad. So that is Kim McLean's piece. Again, that is now we're about at 2016. In 2017, two women, Kim and Nisha, from the Washington, D.C. Modern Quilt Guild, went to Brimfield, Massachusetts, to the Brimfield Flea Market. They were on the hunt for antique quilts and old quilts. And at this market, I gather from watching their videos, you know, you kind of like buy a trash bag of textiles. You know, you don't really know what's in it. You might see a few things at the top and say, okay, I'll invest that money and buy that trash bag of textiles. In that bag was a quilt block called a block they don't know the name of, that they called Brimfield Awakening. They decided to refabricate it as an EPP block. And because they were part of the Modern Quilt Guild, and because they were talking about creating a block, kind of like Kim McLean, where you're making a plate, and then you're, in the case of Kim, you're still EPPing around it to connect all of the fabrics together. So 100% EPP. Kim and Nisha said, why do we have to do that? No, why do we have to do that? Why not create a wreath and then applique it by machine or by hand to a square of fabric? Well, that changed people's perspective again on English paper piecing. Your project doesn't have to be 100% EPP. It can be a single block. So they had this version, which does not have a center. So I made this quilt. This is Anna Maria Horner with Kate's Shot Cottons. And my process was, I'm going to use Anna Maria fabrics. I didn't even know about this, the fact that I was going to use shot cotton as the background. I just wanted to make pretty circles out of all of my, because I'm a sales rep, I have what we call fabric headers for our fabrics. When I show Sonia and Sona the collections, I sometimes have fabric on the cards or as headers. So I have accumulated headers for my favorite designers, of which Anna Maria is one. So I decided to use those headers because you don't need very much fabric. And so I went through my Anna Maria stash many, many times, whereas I prepared to make each of my plates. I didn't know how big the quilt was going to be at all. Brimfield Awakening's pattern calls for 10 blocks. You put 12 blocks, you just make a standard, 3x4. But I thought that was too small. So I just kept going because I was having so much fun. So every few weeks, I would make a box of fabric that I then would use to make these blocks, these reeds. Okay. So, so I finished my reeds, and you'll see I'll pass this around. I used Anna Maria, and I also used some K Facet and Anna Maria woven fabrics. That's what this is. So it has kind of some different textures. And I didn't know how it was going to go together. I didn't know anything, except that I made all of these reeds. And if you go to my Instagram feed, you'll see a stack of these reeds. I didn't know what I was going to do. I said, okay, I'm done. I've had my fill. And what am I going to do next? Well, I thought I would machine applique to a background. So I happen to have this fabric in my stash. And I love that it's shot cotton, which is very light. And also when you turn it different ways, it changes color because shot cotton is made of woven, and the two yarns are different, can be different colors or two different shades of the same color woven together. So depending on how the light catches it, the fabric changes in tone and value as you move it around. So I thought I was going to machine applique this. But guess what? I'm a sales rep. I travel all the time. I do not take my sewing machine. So I thought, okay, all right, I'll hand applique it. So I did. And when you'll see, you can look, I'll pass it around. You can see that I hand applique it, and then you cut out, you take out the papers, and you have to cut out the backing, right? When you do applique like this, to get the paper out, right? Because I applique it with the paper in place. Then you have to cut it out to get the paper out, right?
That's an explanation when you quilting it. It's going to make it pop.
Yes.
So it's actually a good idea to do
Yes,
that.
yes.
Because it will definitely pop.
Yes, thank you. That's a good point. I hadn't thought
No,
about
I'm telling you. It's gonna
Thank you.
pop.
Thank you. So, everything about this I had not really done before.
No.
But Kim and Nisha made me think, I don't have to lug something this big around. I can make these little stories, and then I can have these little squares. So, this thing wasn't sewn together until I'd appliqued each of the rounds to the squares.
If I help you by holding the other corner. can
Oh,
you
sure,
do
yeah,
that?
you can flip it, yeah. I think it goes this way. actually. Thank you. There you go. Here, take that side. Yeah. Thank you. So.
That's beautiful.
Now, I am not interested yet in all this kaleidoscope quilting. That's like too much brain power for me right now. And too much work, too much time spent on looking at the fabric and deciding exactly where to cut it, etc. So what I call this is focal fussy cutting. Because yes, I do care that if it has something to be fussy cut, like this motif, I want to fussy cut it. So I fussy cut the motifs. I did pay attention to direction. And That's about it. I didn't want to have to go down this route.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to do that. And maybe that's why one reason Sona gave up on her La Pasacaglia, because it's a lot of effort. If all you're working on is paying attention to focal pieces and direction, that's not very much. We already do that kind of in our regular quilting. So that's
Hey Liz,
what I
was
do.
the black square in a hoop to do the applique?
No, I did it on my lap.
Okay,
No hoops.
okay.
Thank you. That was a great question.
Are those 15-inch blocks?
They're 12-inch blocks.
12-inch blocks.
Well, yeah.
Beautiful.
Now, the Brimfield Awakening pattern also has a piece in the center. So you could have fabric in the center. Let me show you that. Here, let me pass this around so you can see. You know. And again, I've never appliqued, so it's not perfect, but that's great. That's okay. Also, my points, some of them are round. Who cares? I made this by hand. I haven't decided how I'm going to quilt it yet. I keep going back and forth about hand quilting it, or do I really want to have it custom quilted, or that's why it's been done for 2 years. But I can't decide on the quilting. I just don't want to ruin it by a bad choice. So.
And Liz, if you don't
Yeah.
mind going backwards in time a little bit, the name of the designers for the Brimfield.
Yes, Nisha and Kim, their website is Brimfield Awakening. The project is called Brimfield Awakening. Here is the same block done in a very traditional fabric. And also with the center.
That's beautiful.
Okay, so it's
Oh my gosh.
So this is very cute, you know, little wall hanging done in traditional fabrics. And with the center. Okay. I did not make this. One of our team made this.
And that's hand quilted. Or part, is it
Actually,
a little bit of each?
actually, Kim and Nisha may have made this for us to feature this fabric.
That is beautiful.
Because on our sales cards, when I see Sona and Sonia, I have inspiration on my sales cards, and this was a piece of inspiration on one of our cards. And this went to Quilt Market with us. That's why it has Velcro on the back. So I'll pass this around and you can have a look at it. So, you know, again, I went to town on mine, right? I made a big quilt. You can practice just by making a small quilt. You can add a whole nother element by adding the center. And again, you'll see this is very lightly quilted.
It's cool.
What's so interesting is that one looks super traditional, super old fashioned versus very modern, just
Yes.
keeping the dark color in the middle,
Yep.
keeping the center.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well, oh, here we go. Hold on.
Thank you.
Here, so let's pass that out. So that was what was so special about Nisha and Kim. They said, wait a minute, let's not go this way, let's try a different route. Why it took two different eyeballs to look at it, who knows? Right place, right time frame. Being part of the Modern Quilt Guild, they're already thinking a little bit about how can I take a traditional approach and reimagine it. So that's what's happened. And they've created a whole business around EPP. And they have other patterns and various products.
Is the, in the second one you showed, is the wreath applique onto the center?
It is, yes.
Oh,
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Actually, this is a shape. No, this center is a shape. Just like, and there's a paper and everything for this center. So unlike this, this has actually a huge acrylic and a huge piece of paper.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so the whole thing is EPP in its traditional fashion. And I didn't mention that, when I talk about stitching it together, I'm talking about, in my case, using a whip stitch. Most people know how to use a whip stitch. People ask me all the time, so how many stitches per inch. It's really about your comfort level. And you're developing your own rhythm. It's like your own gauge. You have to come to.
On a fine needle, that's very difficult.
Yeah, so there's many different, there's kind of two ways to do the whip stitch, and then another stitching approach is this flat back stitch, which I have not practiced myself. It's like kind of like knitting. I learned continental, so I can't do American, I can't do British style. I have to do continental because that's how my body knows how to do it. Same with stitching EPP. I learned the whip stitch first. I've made a lot of quilts using it, so that's what I use. But if you're just starting out, there's no reason why you can't experiment with the various ways of doing the stitching to find your comfort level.
What's your favorite needle? Just curious.
Okay, I use a straw needle. I often use the John James brand, but people give me needles, so hey, I'm not that picky. I use a size 11, and I also sometimes will use a very short needle, a little tiny needle. So kind of, again, all of the notions, I'm going to show you these notions, but are you going to be unique? You know, you could have, I have a friend who also does EPP, and we have some of the same things in our EPP box, but some things that are very different.
You use the silk thread?
Okay, so there are several kinds of threads. Liza Lucy here, she likes to use a silk thread. She ties her thread to the needle. Okay, that's important if you're using silk. It comes right through. You know, silk is so fine that just because there's a little tiny, you know, knot onto your needle, it goes through, not a worry. Some people use the Aurifil 80 weight cotton thread. Some people use Aurifil 50 weight, because Aurifil itself is already kind of a thin, it's 50 weight, is still thin. Some people, like me, use a cotton wrapped polyester. Okay, because some people use the Deco Bond bobbins, pre-wound bobbins. You can get those in neutrals and you can get those in colors. I use a Quilts thread that's for actually machine paper piecing. Guess what? I didn't know that. I just thought, oh, paper piecing. To me, that meant EPP, because I hadn't even learned to foundation piece when I started this. Now I have learned it. But Quilts made this thread for paper piecing, foundation paper piecing with a sewing machine. And they gave me boxes of this thread. And I started using it, and I love it because it's extremely strong. Because I tend to really, some people, you know, are delicate in their sewing. I am not. I'm brutal. And so having a polyester wrap cost works for me. I'm not worried that my fabric is 100% cotton and my thread is cotton wrap polyester. That doesn't bother me. Some people, it bothers them. Again, it's all you need. I only use 3 colors of thread also. These are my 3 colors. And they're not even really colors. This weird green goes with everything. But then you need a black, because sometimes, like in this quilt here, you know, you've got really dark colors. So I use black. Some people, like Tula, she matches everything. She's changing her threads all the time. Not for me, but could be for you. Again, it's all what you're interested in. And because we're using straw needles with the little tiny eye, you've got to get threaded. That's it. A thread, a kacha threader like this, which I wasn't going to buy, but my best friend Liz, also Liz, we took a class together with Liza, and she bought me this because I'm like, oh, you know, I don't need that. I'm from the Midwest. You don't need these special things. But you do need this. You might want to buy 2 because you can't always
You can't see it. You need something.
it saves your life. Some people are really good and like they'll do like 10 needles with their thread in it so they can, you know, continue on without stopping. I don't do that, but you might do that. But I definitely recommend this handy device. Treat yourself.
When you use those really short needles.
Yeah.
Is it just a matter of hanging in there to get the hang of it? To me, it's just, I don't know if my hands are too big or what. I don't know, I just.
Well, I'm trying to think why I started using the short needles sometimes. I'm not even sure why. It kind of depends on what I'm doing. Or what kind, like, my needles also, the straw needles bend, right? So I find that I love it when they start bending to my will. Because it, again, depends on your technique, the way you, nip into that fabric, you know, the little bite that you take, you know, you only use 1 or 2 threads on each side of your paper. So it kind of depends on how you attack that. I'm left-handed, so my needle might look different than your needle, right-handed sewer. The other thing you must learn is the quilter's knot. Do you all know what I mean by that? Yeah. That's when you know, oh, and I have this little wee flat rim cushion. So the quilter's knot is, you know, you can go on YouTube and see how to do it. I recommend learning how to do it because it makes a very fine knot. And essentially you're, you know, wrapping and sliding that knot down to the end of your thread. If we ever do a sewing class together, I teach that. For now, you can just go on YouTube to learn it. Yep.
I have a question that I don't want to get too far off the
That's okay.
topic for you, but when you travel, do you have any issues with taking your things with you?
No.
When you're flying?
Never.
Okay, just
No.
curious.
I think early on, they were a lot more, they were looking at that a lot more, but I go through security all the time with this little mini rotary cutter. You have to have a mini. Some people even use a smaller one.
Okay.
I use this one. Never a problem. And I also have 2 pair of scissors.
You probably don't know what to do.
I have these, flat scissors, so you get really close to the fabric. And then I just have a stork, you know, embroidery, all-purpose scissor in here. Yeah. And I have a little tiny seam ripper too, because sometimes you do have to take out, very rarely. But having a little tiny one, you know, in your box is helpful. So yeah, any more questions about thread or needles or?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of still stuck on the question from the Zoomer. Because I'm such a hands-on person. I need you to teach me.
Well,
when you cut off the pieces
Yes.
and you have your paper
Yeah.
with the fabric.
Yeah.
Do you have the same allowances in the paper and wrapping the fabric around?
Here, let me pass these around so you can see them more carefully. So, see, you're sewing along this line here.
Okay, so the paper does not.
Doesn't get attached to it. No.
Yeah.
Occasionally you might pinch a piece of paper. But
Yes,
I
yes.
not to go through the paper.
Yes, sometimes
That
when you,
makes sense.
yeah,
It
when
does
you
make
take your
sense.
papers out, you'll see little nicks
See
along the
everything
paper.
for me.
Yeah. Yeah, here, let me pass these about. One of these squares I hand basted, which I love hand basting because you get into the rhythm of it. Like I can get 4, 5 hexes out of a single thread. You never have thread longer than your arm, otherwise you're
So you
unhappy.
based the fabric around the.
Yes,
the
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Or you can use glue.
Or glue.
Yeah, so these are hand based. These are glue because I've cut the fabric to the shape, so I glue it down. And I use the sew line glue, the glue sticks. I tend to like the ones I like the yellow highlighter one, but it's not that easy to find that one. So when I travel, I buy these for right now because you don't want to ever run out of glue. And then, you know, here's my little sew line. And the reason I use the sew line is because I like the narrow. You could use, you know, Staples glue stick if you're doing something big. But when you're doing, like, potentially you could use it on this size. And it's cheaper. Yeah. But when you're doing something small, like this size, it's too big, it's too fat. you don't want so much glue that you can't remove your paper. So that's why I just stick with the sew line. I like a color, and I like the yellow because you can see where you've glued. Because really, you're only putting on like lipstick. You're just putting a little, you know, on all sides, like a lipstick. Okay, not too much glue. Again, that's technique that we can talk about. So here, so these I glue basted.
And I noticed that you've been pretty generous there with your seam amount, so you don't have to.
Well, that's right. When I do hand basting, I use a 2.5-inch square. And it doesn't always, I mean, these I've used a pin or even maybe a dot of glue to make sure that my fabric's exactly where I want it. But so this, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I'm working on a little project right now, which I'm going to share with you, where, you know, I just cut out 2.5-inch strips. I used black thread, doesn't matter what it is, but I used black here so you can see it. And these are not perfect. Like some sides are narrow and some sides are fat. I don't really care because these I'm not fussy cutting. I'm just applying the fabric to the paper. And I will iron, before I assemble this, which I'll explain later, I will put an iron to this to make crisp edges so that when I'm sewing these all together, I have a nice edge. So, you know, if you want, you can look through this bag and you'll see they're not perfect.
So the size of your squares of fabric really doesn't matter as long as it covers and goes around.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I chose a 2.5-inch square because a lot of people have some jelly rolls at home, right? Zippity doo. Also, I never thought I would buy this thing, but I always laughed when I saw this little 2.5-inch creative grid ruler in the shops, but guess what? It was essential. It was essential to make this project here because I needed to, you know, locate the spot, the pom-pom on all the fabric to fussy cut these circles. Right, so I needed this. And I've used it a lot because it has a center, so you can center it. And then you can see the 1-inch hexie fits very nicely, you know, essentially in the middle here. So why spend time, you know, cutting it you know, to this shape? It didn't seem, I don't know, it seems like a waste of time. So that's why I hand based these. Glue basting a square is very messy. So I only glue base on shapes and hand based on squares. I don't glue base on here. And some people do hand based shapes. I just don't do that. Liza once told me that that's how she started. Like she was a purist, like, oh no, I only hand based. But then somebody sent her a glue stick and glue stick refills, and she started doing it. And it's like, wow, this is transformative because it is faster. The glue is faster. But if you want to make just a stack of 2.5-inch squares and just want to sit in your hotel room or on the plane or wherever, sewing mindlessly, that basting is just part of the fun part of the process. I really enjoy it. Okay, so Brimfield brought us to the quilt that I showed you, and then that second group showing you how it looks with the center. There's loads of projects on the Brimfield Awakening hashtag on Instagram. You can see what people around the world have done with that project. So I mentioned before that in the 19th century, the Brits went out into the world and took EPP with them. One of the places where it grew, the seeds were planted and grew, was in Australia. And two of our most famous EPPers are from Australia. We have Sue Daly, who does incredible video. You can just watch, I suggest watching her videos. She's got great tips and tricks. She has tools that Sona has access to. She can have them for you. She is brilliant in her technique. Sue Daly, S-U-E Daly, D-A-L-E-Y, Australian. She has fabric with Riley Blake, to be fair. The second person whom you might all know is Jen Kingwell, also Australian. Her designs are so interesting and unique. So if you're looking for something interesting to sew, check out Jen Kingwell. She's doing EPP. There's EPP. She writes directions for EPP and sewing machines. Okay. So her books, you know, these are all the shapes for everything in this, Dear Jen. And she gives you directions for sewing it on your machine or doing it EPP, or, you know, she has a lot of applique.
Oh, like your Jane.
Yeah, it's like your only mine, Dear Jen. So she has a lot of really great pieces. You'll recognize some of them because you may have seen them at quilt shows. There are a lot of people who made her boho heart and other of her work that you'll be like, oh yeah, I've seen that. So it may have been done on machine, it may have been done EPP, it may have been a combination, right? Liza has done several quilts for Cave that incorporate EPP elements into a bigger quilt. It might be part of a medallion in the middle, and then pieced borders of some sort. So Jen is really brilliant at pattern design. She has a shop in Australia called Amity Textiles. So she's very relevant. She knows what the fabric trends are, etc. She has fabrics. Oh well,
That was sad, we said.
but you know, she's going to be partnering with us on a project in the future. So she loves Free Spirit fabrics too. So if you get to Australia, go to her shop. It's pretty amazing.
Which part of Australia?
Let's see. I thought I wrote it down, but I didn't. Sorry, it's probably in the front here. Let's see. Nope. So this is from 2020. This is brand new. This project. So that brings me to, from Jen Kingwell to Lucy Kingwell, her daughter. And she created this project called Smitten, right down there. She made this when she fell in love with her now husband. Smitten. And this was part of a project I did with a fellow sales rep, Marisa Simon. We started a club in New Jersey. This is before I moved to Charlotte, where Free Spirit that's the home of Free Spirit. And we started this club to introduce English paper piecing to our quilting community in New Jersey. And we chose this project because the blocks are big and there's all various kinds of blocks. And you could go to town with this with kaleidoscope fussy cutting or not. Again, I chose to do motif fussy cutting and pay attention to direction. That's it. And you make these blocks, you know, again, separate, little stories. Every block tells a story. And I started out using Denise Schmidt fabric, and then I introduced some other fabrics to it. So my palette was Denise Schmidt's palette in this case. And I didn't know how it was going to go together exactly. I mean, of course, the pattern comes with a plan. It tells you exactly how many of this block to make and that block to make, etc. Some of the blocks I did not enjoy making, so I made one and never made it again. And others I made others of because they were more fun. And then I worked on how to fit it all together. And then again, like I said before, I sewed it from the middle outwards. So you can see like this block, it's really made from 3 blocks, 1, 2, 3, these hexes, and then finished with the stone, right, to make it a full hexie plate. So you can come up and look at it. I don't care if you see my stitching. Some people don't like it that if you look closely, you can see my hand stitching. That doesn't bother me. I'm proud of the fact that I made this by hand. Yeah, so it's not perfect, but I'm not perfect. And I had a lot of fun figuring out the finishing here. You know, it's all very, very, very scrappy. And again, you know, I had this up on my design wall, I put it up and then I walked by it about 10 times over the next week or two, and I moved things around until I was happy with how it was going to look, and then I labeled everything. So I wouldn't make a mistake as I put it together going around. Yeah. And then you can see this is a all over quilting job, very lightly quilted. Because gosh, I spent a lot of time putting this together, and I really wanted the blocks to stand out.
Yeah, Liz, is that hand quilted or is it long?
No, this is a long arm. Good question. Yeah, long arm. My friend Betsy Westover did this for me. And I just have a regular cotton. All right. So I made Smitten before I made the Brimfield. Okay. I'm a little out of order, but I did Australia together. So this can also be done by a sewing machine, but then you have a lot of Y seams. Again, one thing about what's great about UPP is the whole Y seam thing goes away. Some people say, oh, Y seams, I can't do that. Well, you can, it just requires prior preparation, right? But with EPP, that whole Y seam thing goes away, really, because you're able to really be precise in your points when you bring the fabrics together. So I made this, then I made Brimfield, and then I'm like, so happy I'm done. I'm not sure where I'm gonna go with EPP next. And then I saw Tula's, it's called Hex on the Beach. She's done another version of this. Yeah. Funny story, my daughter, me, my friend Liz and I talking about hexes. She was in college. She says, Mom, what are you two talking about? Are you talking about, are you saying sexy hexy? What are you talking about? So yeah, these are sexy hexes. I mean, I think this is a very fulfilling and wonderful quilting process. And so yeah, it's sexy. Anyway, I saw this project and I'm like, I really love the end result. Do I love it enough to make 1,000 hexagons? And I took the challenge because honestly, it turned out to be a very soothing project, like doing stockinette stitch for knitting, right? It's the same over and over and over, and it has a certain rhythm and a certain good feel. And usually you're really happy with the result. A nice, flat, beautiful piece of fabric when you're knitting stockinette, because the yarn does all the work. So in this case, it's like, to me, the stockinette of quilting is doing a hexi quilt like this. And Tula has this great pom-pom fabric and these solids that make a very beautiful rainbow. So I'm going to talk a little bit on how I approached this project. So this is the chart right here. This is the pattern. This is the chart. And so what I did was I divided it up into little groups of 3. I'm not going to talk about this top row because that's kind of its own unique row. But I made trios, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So first I hand basted 1,000 hexes. And I knew exactly how many to do because Tula gives you a graph like this for every row and tells you how many you need 24 sweet peas. So I knew I needed 24 of this color and 26 of this color, right? So I had a whole chart. And I used my little 2.5-inch square acrylic to cut out this pom-pom from yardage. Okay. So this was my guide as to how many and what color I needed. So that was a whole, and I had this beautiful tray. It looks really pretty when you start filling your tray with your hexes. And when you go on EPP, #EPP, you'll see lots of people with their trays of hexes. You feel really like, I've done so much. And all you've done is wrap some fabric around paper. And it's all hand basted, okay? So 2.5-inch squares, hand basted onto 1-inch hexes. And so I did that. Then I just started making, like I say, trios. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I had trio units, a whole bunch of them, you know. I don't know how, I'd have to calculate that, but a lot. So I have not sewn any rows or anything together. Now I just have, from single hexes, I now have trios of hexes. And that was also very satisfying because you don't have to think that much. It's great. You use your kacha all the threader all the time, and I use just, again, the 3 colors, the black, a neutral, and this weird green. Okay, and you can see the stitches. I mean, if you come up here, you will see the white or the cream in these colors. Look, Tula changed her thread all the time. No, not for me. I use the 3 colors, okay? So at the end of the day, I have all these trios. Now I have to put them together, and Tula's given us this amazing chart. So I started making my rows like this. So then I had 28 rows, I think it is, 28 rows. Then I started putting, you know, this is a one time where you don't throw from the middle, you actually do top to bottom. And I made my little pieces here, and then I started 2, 2, 2. So then I had 2s together, 4s together, 6s together, the same way you would assemble a thing. So this kept me occupied through a very nice period of time, and I could easily travel with it. I didn't cut all my fabric at once. I would spend maybe, you know, an hour on a Sunday preparing whatever it was I was going to do that for the next few weeks while I was on the road. So, again, you don't have to cut your fabric all at once. I did buy all the fabric for this at once because this is a very specific look, a very specific project. So this wasn't grown organically like other kinds of, in terms of fabric stash. So, yeah, I had a bag of 1,000 little 1-inch hexes. So it's very satisfying when that bag is empty. So that is Tula Pink. Tula, this was 2019. Okay, so it didn't actually take that long to make. It was faster than this. And faster, well, not really faster than Brimfield. Brimfield's kind of easy because, again, you're only making however many reeds you want and appliquing it to a block of a square of fabric. So that was Tula Pink. She's done a lot of EPP. If you follow Tula Pink on Instagram, her Tuesday talks, at least once a month, she's talking about English paper piecing. And so she has projects like this Tula Nova. So this is the pattern. And you can buy this template set. You know, it's branded, it's very cute, it comes in a box like this. And these are all the papers that you need. So 1 paper per piece. And again, over time you acquire all these shapes, all these kinds of shapes and all these papers, and you have leftovers and you can reuse your templates. I mean, they don't, just because it says Tula Nova doesn't mean you can't decide to use a shape or a block that you learned making that project in your own project. So all this stuff is out there. Her next collection, Daydreamer, is coming out. Sona will have that. There is a project associated, an EPP project associated with that line of fabric. If you know it. So Tula does all her own EPP projects. So that is Tula Pink, and that's kind of where I am today. The Jen Kingwell and what she's doing is probably where I'm going to go next. I haven't actually decided because right now I'm making a flannel quilt, which I've never done before, and I am using random number generator to. I numbered all the fabrics, and I'm using a random number generator to just make a block quilt. You know, a 5.5 inch blocks, right? And I don't want to agonize over where each and every block should go. So I'm using a random number generator and just be happy. So that's kind of where I am right now. I just want to sew it and be happy. So other things I have here on my desk that I want to share with you is Quilt Mania magazine. Again, they're the people who published La Pasacaglia and the Millie Fiore books and this is their magazine. This magazine has at least one EPP project per issue. So, you know, you can find out more about what is trending on EPP. Also, here from a European perspective. I also have, if you want to learn more about English paper piecing from a historical point of view or a socio-biological point of view, because there's a lot of studies being done right now about how handwork affects our brain and our bodies. Some people find EPP extremely meditative and a good thing to do every day. It's like yoga and like meditation. So if you want to learn more about that, I suggest this book, English Paper Piecing by Florence Knapp. She's a Brit. Really engaging writing style. If you want to learn all about the mathematics of English paper piecing and all of the various shapes, I suggest All Points Patchwork by Diane Gilliland. She's US based. And she goes into really fine detail on every single shape. She also has very good diagrams on actually sewing and assembling EPP. And the picture on the front shows you what it looks like if you sew through the paper. If you're instead of using glue basting or the hand basting method I'm using, that I'm showing here today, this picture shows you what it looks like if you sew through the paper. So and there's lots of very nice projects in there, big and small in the back. So I suggest these two books if you want to learn more. They're good investments. All right. This is called Flowerful, and it, like Brimfield, is a single block that you can applique or machine applique to fabric. It's a very sweet block. This could be a pillow. Could be anything. I'll pass this around. This is called Flowerful. Another thing you can do is just a hexie pillow. So these are 1-inch hexies done in like a rainbow. I think this is Allison Glass fabric. And you just, this is not EPP in its strictest sense, but I think it's a fun way of using this shape. And then you machine stitch them onto a piece of fabric to make a pillow. So it's a really cute pattern. I'll pass this around. This is called the Jilly Dilly bag. This is using Tulip Pink's Homemade, which, you know, features sewing related fabrics. And this is a 1.5-inch hexie, so bigger. So it shows off the fabric really nicely. And there's a little heart applique here. And this is the pattern. So if you want to try a small project, and you like bags, this could be an option for you.
So how does a bag like that hold up if all the pieces are sewn by hand rather than machine?
I don't know. I don't, you know, in a way, I don't care that much.
Oh,
Yeah, there's fusible.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but you know, it's so cute.
It is cute. It's very
I
cute.
don't know.
I asked the hard question.
Frankly, I've hardly had a chance. We've, you know, hardly had a chance to use it. But you're not going to put your. This is not for your handbag. This is for like knitting or something.
Yeah.
It's not too heavy.
Usable.
Yeah. So it's just
It's
just so fun.
Not to be a Debbie Downer. I'm just curious.
So I don't need to like.
No, that's okay.
But you know, I know I get these.
I've never done English paper piecing, and so I don't know anything. You know, I was just curious about that.
Don't start with Millie Fiore.
Yes,
No.
don't start.
I'm
Yes.
not gonna have to.
Try Brimfield first or something. Well, here, this is what I'm suggesting people start with. And this is what you have the pattern for. This is this bolster. This takes 99 1-inch hexies. Okay? And here, I'm almost done. I just started these. And I'm almost done with 99.
Is the bag lined?
Pardon me? Yeah.
Yep.
The bag is lined. Yep.
I think that answers your question. That would be my question.
So I just cut up a lot of Anna Maria
really
fabric here in hindsight, and cave dots, because the dots are great. And I counted out 90, well, probably like 105 of these, because, you know, I'll probably, when I do my placement, I'll probably use some and not others. So this is what I've been doing in my hotel room the past 2 nights, is this. And I'm going to make this bolster. So how you make it essentially is 99 pieces, and you make a flat piece of fabric, so a rectangle of fabric. And then you essentially wrap it onto a bolster. And I give you the directions on how to make a liner. So potentially you could, I mean, this is attached, but you don't have to attach it. You could slide this middle out and use it with other things. I've also done this where I've made a stripe by fussy cut. What's fun about Guinea flower is you can fussy cut this, and then you have a lot left over of the background fabric. And so mine is it's Guinea flowers and then striped with the background, my leftover of this, right? So I used up a lot of, you know, I didn't have Swiss cheese or quilter's lace or a fabric with a lot of holes in it. I used all the parts of the fabric and I made a stripe. So, but I'm suggesting don't worry about fussy cutting, or if you do worry about fussy cutting, just focus on a motif and try this, because really, if you make this, after making 99 hexies, whether you cut them to shape or you use this 2.5-inch square and fold it with hand basting, you're gonna know if you like doing this process and finish it. You know, even if you're struggling a little bit, even if it's imperfect, finish it, because this pillow is very comfortable. And people look at it and go, ooh, ah. So I'll pass this around. You have the directions. Sona can get you the bolster, because these are not easy to find. You have to, you know, get them at a shop like Sona's. And so I suggest giving this a try. So I'm going to pass it around. It's, let's see, I want to make sure. Oh, another little thing I want to show you is here again. I want to reinforce this message about Jen Kingwell. She's produced these little postcard patterns that come with an acrylic, and she gives you the directions to sew it by hand or by machine. She has the corners here, so you can do your dots for Y-seams, or not Y-seams, but for sewing these corners. I'm going to pass it around. So this is Jen Kingwell, and these are her postcard projects. This is number 15, and it features the 60-degree equilateral triangle. So it comes just like this in a little cellophane. So you can make a wall hanging, you can go to town with it. You know, there's lots of things. You can make a bolster out of this shape, right? So I'll just pass this around. Are those in the shop? I don't know.
I don't think we have those. They may be in our room.
So for this project or a project like that, you know, 2.5-inch strip jelly roll, cut 2.5-inch strips out of your stash, use a 5-inch charm and, you know, make it into 2.5-inch squares. I mean, really anything when you're at this size, and, you know, go to town with it. Let's see, I think I've covered everything in my box here. Oh, I also have this miniature grid.
Oh, yeah, I have.
To go with this, right? And then I used this lid. And so my mom had this in her box room, this little Pulitzer box, and I thought this would be perfect for my little kit. And I got this. I love hexagons from Paper Pieces, and Brimfield had this sticker. But you know, people have make their own, buy Annie's project bag, or there's loads of bags out there that you can use for projects, but hey, I got started right away by finding a, a heavy duty box, and I've had this now for like 5 years. So looks as good as ever.
It's lived through it.
And it's pink, so, it looks great in photos. And I just, again, keep everything I need in it, all the time, so I'm always ready to go.
Could you tell me the name of those little blue sticks again?
Sure, So Line, SCW Line, they are a company that has loads of notions. I'm sure Sona has these, and then the glue sticks.
So someone, she has, are those the refills?
These are the refills. This is the wand stick. And again, I've had this a long time. Sometimes you have to clean it up a little bit. It gets a little rotty over time, and then you just keep buying these until you lose this, and then you got to sort of.
Sometimes you have 2 or 3 of them at home.
Yeah.
Say, where did these come
Yeah,
from?
well, it's kind of like scissors, one in every possible spot.
Yeah.
But I really try to keep this on my couch, I really try to keep these things for this. So it's dedicated to this. If I were doing, say, applique or something where I needed a glue stick for another project, that would be another glue stick. I really try hard to keep these things here. And I think you may find yourself, if you can, keeping something like this in by itself, ready to go, will make your life so much better. You won't be searching for this stuff. Again, it's kind of on my couch all the time.
So this glue is tacky, but not so permanent that you can.
Yeah, it's not
paper or
permanent.
Whatever,
It'll come out, if you get it on the fabric, it'll come out in the wash. It's washable. So yeah, if you do get a glue stick from Staples or whatever, you have to make sure it's washable, not permanent. Yeah.
This question is more for Sona than you, I guess, but you have all of these types of products in the store?
We have a lot of this stuff in the store. We can order some books have been on back order. So we do have a little bit of issues getting stuff, but we've got.
So this bag has 100 hexes in it, 1-inch hexes. So she has these, so if you want to try the bolster, you just need one bag at $3.76.
Yeah, and all our pre-cuts are,
This is so
percent off this week, actually through tomorrow. I gotta keep my mask off.
You can't hear me.
Sorry. We have a lot of templates at the store. We do have the Tulip Pink box of templates. We did do a lot of paper piecing with English paper piecing with Pasacaglia. We had before COVID classes on that, and that's where I decided to take that class, which I think the bolster is a lot more my speed for beginners. So we do have a lot of the supplies in the store. So you're welcome to shop in the store and see what we have there. We also want to make sure that we would love to invite you to come teach a workshop, so that, and I know we would all love to sit and learn the techniques to create these beautiful masterpieces. And I know you say that the fabric does a lot of the talking, but there's a lot of creativity that goes behind it. So I know that her class would be full. I know. I definitely would be a participant. So we would definitely. I'm extending the invitation right now.
Oh, all right.
That's it.
In the morning, we do hand basting. In the afternoon, we do glue based, or maybe some reverse, doesn't matter. We make a little tumbling block like this, and we make a little rosette like this. So it's very basic. Again, I show how I do it. You all are going to iterate from that. Or if you come in already having done it, sometimes you'll learn that one thing. Like the quilter's not. Really good to know. But you can go on YouTube and learn all about it. It just takes practice. You do it over and over and over again. And yes.
So way last century, when I took home economics in 7th grade,
Oh, man.
we learned how to hem. Okay, and
Yes.
that's like learn how to hem and sew on
Yeah,
buttons and stuff
yeah.
like that. Very useful, honestly, very useful skills to
Yes.
have.
Yeah.
And so they always taught us to have the double strand of thread.
Yeah.
So when we do English paper piecing,
Single
use a
strand.
single strand. Okay.
Yeah,
All
single
right.
strand.
Okay.
And also, really, Sue Daly, you watch some of her videos.
Okay.
Have them going while you're doing it. I mean, watch and learn and do and watch, you know, they can just choose so friendly and funny that having her talk while you're doing is nice. Also, Liza Lucy did a EPP video on creativebug.com. I think it's free. So you can watch her talk about EPP also and her techniques. So, you know, from Liza, I learned that with silk, you've got to tie the thread to the needle. She doesn't want you to see her threads.
So do you
That's
tie
why
a knot
she
in the
does
end of the
silk.
thread to keep it from coming through the
Yeah.
fabric?
Mhm.
Okay.
Same quilter's knot, but and also tie the thread to the
needle.
needle. Yeah,
Who knew?
I have no idea what you're talking
tying the thread to the needle.
about. Yes.
You literally put the needle through the eye and you tie it to the needle.
So the bottom of the needle is
Has a little knot.
anchored to the
Yes.
thread.
Okay.
Yeah.
By the eye, not on the, yeah, okay.
So you have a knot at one end,
Mhm.
and then you tie the loose end to the needle.
It's just a one through.
It's just a one through.
Not a
That's
double,
right.
not a
Correct.
double.
Correct. Because it's so slippery. I mean, again, you know, with handwork, again, left-handed, right-handed, the way you attack the, I shouldn't use it, the way you sew, the way you attack the yarn, the thread and your fabric and paper, for some people, my thread tends to get kind of twisty. Just the way I use my hand and wrist action. Some people with the silk, like, so my silk's always a mess and I never want to use silk. No. So tying on was important. If I were to continue to practice with silk, I'm sure I'd get the hang of it. But because when I sew, my thread twists, I have to tie it onto the needle. You might be really a straight, you know, straight arrow sewer.
Never have.
Yeah, straight arrow sewer might not really need to tie it on. But it really depends on your body action. Yep,
Can you tell us the number of the weird green? The
Oh.
weird green.
sure. Well, you can come up and look. This
Okay.
weird green is, because these last forever, like 225 yards. This lasts a long time. It's number S942.
Thank you.
If you come to my class, I give you the
We are gonna, I am coming to your class.
Oh,
We
yeah.
will have it here.
Liz, do you use beeswax on the thread when hand sewing?
Sure, if I were using cotton, I do talk about using a thread wax. If I were using maybe the Aurifil 50 or 80 weight, and again, depending on your wrist action, you might want to use the little, I guess it's beeswax thread conditioner. I don't think it's necessary for every single person. I don't use it myself, but I do talk about it. Because I'm a less is more. But, you know, again, just like with knitting or embroidery or anything that you're doing by hand, you develop your own comfort zone in terms of your notions.
Yeah.
So if that makes you feel good about using the thread conditioner because you hate it when things get all, you know, messy, use it. We have it. We're lucky that way. Any other questions? I can go on and on.
I just wanted to share, if you want to try the acrylic templates, they're beautifully developed. They've got silicone you can iron. They're made by a company called Epiflex.
Say it again?
Epiflex, EPPIFLEX. And you can buy the templates online, but they also have beautiful kits. with all
That's
the
great
pieces.
to know.
Yeah.
Just don't start your EPP journey with a twist in time. I can tell you from personal experience, don't do it.
Twist in time.
Yeah, it's this huge circle with triangles, et cetera. And I was like,
Yes,
that's
see,
beautiful. Let me try
Yeah,
that.
I mean, you
How
know,
hard could it be?
yeah. Yeah, that's why the bolster is so great.
Yeah.
Because, it's 99 pieces. Honestly, you're gonna know really fast. I had a friend who gave up halfway through and I finished it. She couldn't even get that far. She's like, you know what, Liz? It's not for me. And so you're gonna know. And then you'll move from that to something else, like a Brimfield, where you're making a wreath or a star or something and then applying it to a block. And then, you know, maybe you'll move on to something like Smitten or Hex on the Beach or even this. At this size, this is very easy. At this size honeycomb, not the tiny honeycomb. If you move to this size, it's very quick and easier. So you get a lot of satisfaction. And then, you know, again, this isn't hard in terms of fabric choice, in terms of the skin. There's only like 7 pieces, I think, 7 different shapes here. And that's because there's different diamonds here, you know. And then maybe you'll move on to a more kaleidoscope like what Katya is doing. And then maybe you move on to the Millie Fiore quilts. Don't go there first. Well, and I mean, it depends on your personality. Yeah. I want to feel good right out of the gate, and that's such a long-term project. It's an heirloom project that you got to have in knitting. We have our car knitting, our TV knitting, and then our really complicated knitting. And you have that in sewing too, whether it's by machine or by hand. You have your easy one, and then you have the one that it's snowing, well, not here, it's raining outside, and you're home for 3 days, and you can really sit at your table or in your sewing chair and really devote your mind and body to it. Right? It's not something you really do by watching TV, because there's a lot of preparation with the Millie Fiore quilts.
Yeah, I always hear like a lot of the younger moms, that's their carpool, the carpool hexes, so you know, just in the carpool line, that's what we do.
Anything else?
Any questions for Liz?
Let me just
Any-
review.